Welcome everyone to today's Human Trafficking webinar. Today we're going to have Nicole Von Oy presenting. We also are going to have Emily Gibson from COA Standards Department join us a little bit later in the presentation. Nicole Von Oy, our main presenter today, is the Love 146 U.S. Training and Outreach Coordinator. In this role, she is responsible for the TIME model, which includes training adult professionals on issues of commercial sexual exploitation of children, as well as mentoring and implementing prevention education with adolescents. Nicole currently facilitates the My Life, My Choice, and Tell Your Friends curricula in schools and residential congregate care settings across Connecticut, and she mentors survivors of sexual exploitation. And we are very pleased to have Nicole with us today. And if you'd like to take the floor, Nicole.
Great, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm extremely thrilled to be a part of this, and that COA has asked me to do this and educate you guys on this issue. Obviously, this is something that we could talk about for days, but we have an hour and a half, and we'll see what we can put in that short time. I do want to encourage you to ask any questions in the chat box. This is a different kind of forum, so I can't see you guys and read you guys and see your hands up for questions. So please don't be afraid to ask questions throughout in the chat box, and I'll be paying attention to answer those questions throughout. So a little bit about Love 146 and what we do. We began about 10 years ago when our co-founders had gone on an exploratory trip to Asia to find out more about this issue and what was happening. They had seen it in some of the work that they had done and really felt helpless and wanted to do something. So they had some partners that they knew of in Asia that were doing this work. So when they went over there, they went on an undercover investigation that was being done on a brothel. In this particular brothel, for those of you that may not know what a brothel is, it's where young women and children are sold for sexual purposes. And so they walked into this brothel, and inside they were on the side of the buyers, and separating them from the young girls was a pane of glass. And on the other side of that glass were several young girls between the ages of 8 and 14 years old, all wearing matching red dresses and their names taken away by a number. Many of them dazed. I'm sure you can imagine the type of trauma that they experience on a day-to-day basis of having to perform sexual acts on strangers and people that are probably not what they want to be performing sexual acts on. So these kids are, as I said, dazed. In the corner of the room, there was 2 televisions playing cartoons. Except for this one girl, she had this fight and this life left inside of her, like she wanted to bust through that glass and beat the ever-living bleepity bleep out of the guys on the other side. And her number was 146. And so we fight on behalf of her and all the other children that she represents around the world. And love for us means to protect, defend, restore, and empower. And so we try in all of our programming to include those 4 key components where we're protecting children, defending them, restoring them, and empowering them. So we have programs in Asia. Specifically, we have a aftercare facility called the Round Home, and it's called the Round Home because it's round. Our director of aftercare has a very holistic approach to aftercare, and wanted the home to be round, so there were no sharp edges, no corners where kids could get lost or were left out. And so we have about 15 girls there. And then we have prevention education in Cambodia and Thailand, working with boys and girls. And then here in the United States, we started working here about almost 3 years ago when they realized, hold on a second, this is something happening in our very own backyard, and what are we doing here? to stop this from happening. And so I came on board and started running a couple of the programs that we initiated here in the state, one called My Life, My Choice, which is a 10-week intensive group for adolescent girls, and a shorter version of that called Tell Your Friends, which goes into schools, community settings, short-term congregate care, shelters, and both of these educate youth on the issue of trafficking and give them really tools and knowledge to protect themselves while out in the community. So here what you're looking at in the Tell Your Friends program, these two pictures, in the second session we asked the kids to draw what they think human trafficking looks like. And so these are drawings from two young girls who were participating in the Tell Your Friends program, who ended up disclosing their abuse and trafficking situation to the facilitator upon further questioning of these drawings. When we ask the kids to do this, it's typically very vague, or you have the stereotypical pimp who has the hat and the cane and the purple suit with the alligator shoes, to kids drawing our story, and they can get fairly graphic and particular, and those are the ones that we push a little further and ask more questions with these students, obviously on the side and not in front of the class to embarrass them. So what is human trafficking? I can give you the technical definitions. I am a very simple person. I like simple terms, and basically it's the buying and selling of human beings. It can include recruitment, it can include harboring, transporting them within national or across international borders. And people tend to think that, because human trafficking, the term connotes movement, that you have to be moved from one place to the other for it to be considered trafficking, which is actually not the case. A child can be specifically put into their uncle's basement and kept there and forced to perform sexual acts on individuals willing to pay for them, and that would still be considered trafficking. The three key words here that we'll focus on, again, a little bit later, I'll go into definitions, is force, fraud, and coercion. And those three words are important, especially when it comes to the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which I'll also discuss in a little bit. But it basically, in this law, anyone under the age of 18, and this is a federal law, anyone under the age of 18 is automatically considered a victim, whereas above the age of 18, force, fraud, and coercion has to be proven in a court of law. What is commercial sexual exploitation of children? And I think sometimes this can be confused, and I kind of want to break down exploitation and commercial sexual exploitation. If we think about what sexual exploitation is, and an example that I can give you is someone taking a nude photo of a child and posting it on the internet. The time when it becomes commercial is when something is exchanged for that. So now this person takes that picture, puts it online, and charges for it. So then that's commercial sexual exploitation. So to define commercial sexual exploitation of children, again, I like simple terms. So I'm just going to point out a few things in this definition. Is remuneration in cash or kind to the child or a third person or persons. The key part in that is remuneration in cash or kind. The child does not have to be just receiving money. We've heard children receiving cell phone minutes, car rides home, purses, clothes, food, shelter. It does not have to be just in exchange for money. Obviously, the child is treated as a sexual object and as a commercial object, and it constitutes a form of coercion and violence against children. Now, to take that a step further, CSEC, commercial sexual exploitation of children, falls under human trafficking. It is a form of human trafficking, and it's basically defined as any minor under the age of 18 who's involved in a commercial sex act. But to take that even further, what we're starting, this term was coined by Shared Hope International, which is an organization here in the United States that also works with this issue. They coined the term domestic minor sex trafficking, which specifically refers to commercial sexual exploitation of any American citizen or permanent resident under the age of 18. So you kind of have here EMST, which falls under CSEC, which falls under human trafficking. So some forms of CSEC and domestic minor sex trafficking, we break it down into 3 specific categories, which is prostitution, stripping, and pornography. Under prostitution, you have your escort services, you have your internet-based prostitution, which, believe it or not, nowadays, the internet is becoming the new streets. And so we're finding girls being advertised on places like Craigslist and Backpage and the back of, we have here in Connecticut something called the Hartford Advocate and the New Haven Advocate, and they're basically like newspapers almost, where kids are being advertised. And so they're being advertised on there. The pimp's number is linked to it, or probably a throwaway cell phone is linked to it, in which the customer calls to set up a date with this individual. And the child is put in a hotel or motel room and just waiting for the customers to come in to serve them. Erotic and nude massage, interfamilial pimping, which is where we're finding family members are selling their children. Here in Connecticut, we've had a couple cases of kids being sold by their parents. One in particular was the parents selling their child to make their monthly truck payment. We had another case of mom selling her daughter for drugs to support her drug habit. We've had a few of those cases actually. So it's not uncommon, and this is where we're finding the kids younger. The youngest victim that has been identified here in the state has been 11 years old. Street walking, you don't find that as common as you may have 5-10 years ago, but it does still exist. You still have tracks and streets in particular cities where you will find individuals walking and selling themselves or being sold by pimps. Stripping, private parties and clubs. Stripping we like to consider is actually the gateway, just like you have marijuana, as they say, is the gateway drug to harder drugs. Stripping is the gateway to prostitution. And so, especially when it comes to pimps and traffickers, it's a good way to get the girls started. Private parties are the easiest because you more than likely won't have cops coming in and out unless, of course, it's a crazy party. So stags and bachelor parties, or just parties in general that girls are hired, and strip clubs. And, you know, we get the question often, how are young kids getting into strip clubs? And the very answer to that is fake IDs. And so here in Connecticut, we've had, just to kind of give you an example of how sophisticated these fake IDs can be, we had a young girl who went through our women's prison 3 times. She was identified as being 21. She was arrested for prostitution 3 times. The 3rd time, they discharged her to a women's shelter. And in addition to a fake ID, the pimps and traffickers will typically give them a rehearsed story to tell, as well as a fake name. And as time went on, the counselor at the women's shelter realized that her story started to change, and she was like, hold on, I thought you said you were born here, and that, this, and this, and finally the girl ended up writing on a piece of paper her real name and her real age, and she was 16 years old. And so that just kind of gives you an idea of, one, how sophisticated that ID was to be in, and once they're in the system, she was continually arrested and still brought to our women's prison. But the lies that they are and stories that they're made to tell can be fairly believable. And then pornography, that was, I'm going to throw myself under the bus with this, and I always kind of struggled with it, not understanding how it could be trafficking. It seemed like something that was so legitimate and something that was so, that there were safe practices, but until a few years ago, we had a young woman contact us who had been in the pornography industry, and she was telling us her story. She grew up in a very abusive home. Her dad sexually molested her most of her life. She really didn't have anyone to support her, met a guy, married young. After a few years of being with him, being really abusive, he had pretty much had enough with her and kicked her out in the streets, and so she was homeless. And out on the streets, she lived in LA at the time. They told her, you're beautiful, why don't you go into the porn industry for a few weeks and get yourself back on your feet and, go from there. So she did. If you want to be in the porn industry, there's 2 agents, according to her, in LA that you go to. She went to one of them. They hired her on the spot, and she was there she did it for 3 weeks and decided, you know what, I'm done. Can you, pay up? I'm ready to go. And the agent said to her, no, you're not. In fact, the next scene is a gang rape. Come on, everyone, come in. And she was then trafficked for the next 3.5 years and found during a raid. So she also had said that several young girls, 16, 17 years old, were constantly going through those studios and being forced to film. So the scope of the problem, I'll kind of break it down a little bit internationally, and I know our focus is here domestically, but just to give you an idea of how big of an issue this is, that the UN estimates that the total market value annually of human trafficking is roughly $32 billion. And if you think about it, if I were a weapons dealer or if I were a drug dealer, I can only sell that weapon or that drug once. Okay. If I'm selling a human being, I can sell them over and over and over again in one night. And so, as a pimp or a trafficker, that'd be the smartest way to go because I'm going to earn the most money. So you can see how that would be a very why it's such a big market and how you make so much money. It's the second largest income generating syndicate in the world. The CIA estimates that it's going to surpass the drug trade in the next 10 years. So drugs are first, and actually weapons and human trafficking are tied. And I also just want to say as a side note that some of the numbers that I'm giving you are also estimates. I mean, this is something that is so underground, it's very hard to keep track of numbers, and so there's lots of people that come up with different estimates and what's accurate and what's not. So, even the 27 million number and some of the numbers that I'm going to be giving you shortly, these are estimates. They could be bigger. We don't know. And so just keep that in mind as we discuss these numbers. So 27 million people are currently enslaved worldwide, which is more than double the number of Africans enslaved in the Atlantic slave trade. And we have to keep in mind that our population has more than, I was going to say doubled, but even more than that, because we're over 7 billion people in the world today. And so, there was 13 million enslaved during the Atlantic slave trade. And also to think about, when I talk about the numbers, the Emancipation Proclamation was supposed to set slaves free, in which it did, but what happened is, slavery went from being legal to illegal with the Emancipation Proclamation, but it also went from being above ground to underground. And that's why it's also difficult to put definitive numbers on this issue. Sex tourism, if any of you have heard of it, excuse me, is something that is mostly done by men. The numbers show about 95% are done by men. And as you can see on this slide, a retired U.S. school teacher stated, "On this trip I've had sex with a 14-year-old girl in Mexico and a 15-year-old in Colombia. I'm helping them financially. If they don't have sex with me, they may not have enough food. If someone has a problem with me doing this, let UNICEF feed them." I always laugh when I read this quote because to me it's just like, how can you just feed them? I don't know. That's just a thought. You could just give them some food and be on your way, but no, you need an excuse. So that always blows my mind, no matter how many times I read this quote. And thinking about the United States, we are a destination country, although I'm starting to hear reports that we're starting to ship people out to other countries, but I have no confirmation or research on that, so I don't want to tell you that that's definitely happening, but I'm starting to hear that trend amongst my colleagues. So it's based on supply and demand, so obviously we're a demand country. There's intrastate and interstate trafficking, so intra would be within a state and interstate is throughout the U.S. There are some circuits in particular that are followed by pimps and traffickers. One they call the Triangle, which is New York, Vegas, and Miami, up and down the East Coast, which is also a drug trafficking route, so the 95 corridor, as well as up and down the West Coast. And really moving them around and moving them from place to place, it keeps victims isolated and disoriented. And so, if you guys can think about some of the major events that happen across the United States, that gather tons of men, like the Super Bowl, World Cup, World Series, Republican and Democratic national conventions, girls are moved to these places and there to service those individuals. And especially during the Super Bowl last year in Indiana, they noticed how much the advertisements on Craigslist and Backpage increased and how much trafficking increased during the Super Bowl. But also to stick on that with keeping victims isolated and disoriented, they typically, because they're moved around, they cannot form relationships with people. They're away from their families. And so when, there's problems, the pimp is the only person that they can depend on. Sex tourism in the U.S., obviously this is something that's going to happen in our very own country and not just everywhere else. But U.S. citizens account for 25% of child sex tourists worldwide. And believe it or not, the U.S. is the #1 destination for Americans seeking sex with a child. This is just some national trafficking routes that I was talking about. You can take a better look at that when you have the PowerPoint to look that over. So here in the United States, at least 100,000 children are forcibly engaged in prostitution or pornography every single year. Some of you may have heard the numbers, between 100,000 and 300,000 kids are at risk. I've even heard now up to 550,000 kids are at risk. But that is a very large number of children. It's estimated that in the first 48 hours on the streets. 1 in 3 runaway children are lured into prostitution. And what people need to understand is that runaways are prey for pimps. You know, in some of my girls' groups, they'll say, nobody knows I'm running away. And, you know, we'll just kind of have a discussion around that. And I say, okay, so you think that, you know, you're walking down the street, you might be upset, crying, walking to the bus station or train station, or trying to hitch a ride with a backpack on your back at 3 in the morning that no one's going to think you're running away. Sometimes I hear crickets because they're looking at me like, shoot, I'm caught. Or then it starts a debate and a conversation because, of course, teenagers are always right. So it becomes very interesting. And believe it or not, the average age of entry into prostitution is 13 years old. So prostitute versus commercially sexually exploited child. This always brings up great conversation, especially when I'm working with service providers, law enforcement. I ask, you know, I ask you guys to think about this, even though it can't be a response sort of thing. But if you were to go out on the streets, or even yourself, stepping out of your helping roles, and I asked you to tell me the words that come to mind when you hear the word prostitute, and I'll just kind of give you guys an idea of some of the things that I hear when I'm doing this training. You know, some of the first things that might come to someone's mind is street corners, short skirts, heels, drugs, STDs, whore, slut, hooker, pretty woman, escorts, lots of money. So there's lots of different things that come up. But when we look at the majority of them, they're very negative, right? So we have this prostitute. She's just this dirty whore. Get her off my streets. I don't care about her. Just, you know, go have the police handle her. Just get her out of my neighborhood. Whereas if I ask you guys, what comes to mind when you hear commercially sexually exploited child, the things that I get are victim, abused, neglected, lonely, international, pimps and traffickers. So if you can see the difference between what comes up for prostitute versus commercially sexually exploited child, the main purpose of that activity is really getting people to understand that these two individuals that we're talking about are the same exact individuals. It's the language that we use to describe them. And so, you know, seeing the negative connotations with prostitute, if we have a child that comes in for services and we're working with them and we call them a prostitute, that's an immediate shaming description, or, you know, that's going to shame them immediately. And what's going to make someone want to share their story when you think they're a prostitute? And if we looked at, and I'm not saying go around and start calling them commercially sexually exploited child because it's a mouthful and we don't all do that here, but really starting to use that child was prostituted or that child is exploited, really kind of changing that. And I even add to the prostitute side, what if I added teen above prostitute, teen prostitute? Would that change anything? Some people say yes, some people say no. And we have a discussion around that. So really challenge you guys to think about that and the language that we use and how shaming it can be, that these children really deserve support and they need your support in going through this process, and that the words that we use to describe them can have a great effect. And some examples of that, a few years ago, many of you may have heard of the Lawrence Taylor case. Lawrence Taylor is a football player for the New York Giants and was caught, and the headlines read, "Caught with a teen hooker," quote unquote. And so if you could think of what society's immediate response to that was she probably chose to do it. You know, she grew up in a bad home, she ran away, or she's being defiant, whatever. But a lot of people didn't realize that she was 16 years old, she was being abused most of her life by her father, and she was being sold by a pimp. And so we have to just kind of think about that wording and how much that makes a difference. In another example, Gary Ridgway, who is considered the Green River Killer, had said in court, "I picked prostitutes as my victims because I hate most prostitutes and I did not want to pay them for sex. I also picked prostitutes as victims because they were easy to pick up without being noticed. I knew they would not be reported missing right away and might never be reported missing. I picked prostitutes because I thought I could kill as many of them as I wanted without getting caught." With that being said, of Gary's 48 admitted victims, 27 of those, so more than half, 27 of those victims were between the ages of 15 and 18 years old. And many people, the mass media and public, didn't know this because they were always considered prostitutes. And so really I challenge you guys to think about what difference does changing the language we use to talk about sexual exploitation make? How do these terms impact how children are seen and treated? And how do these terms impact how the issue of CSEC is addressed? Some things to think about. It reframes the issue as a form of child abuse. I'm not sure what all of your mandated reporter laws are in each state that you're coming from, but here in Connecticut, it is now considered a form of child abuse under our mandated reporter laws and is in our mandated reporter manual. So if we do come across a case like that here in Connecticut, it has to be reported to our Department of Children and Families, which is our, I'm not sure how it's considered in each state, but Youth and Family Services, Social Services, etc. It expresses the philosophy that these children deserve support services instead of jail sentences, and it certainly more accurately represents the scope of the issue and the reality of their experiences. So the Trafficking Victims Protection Act is what I had mentioned earlier on. It's been reauthorized several times and was just reauthorized again and signed last week. And it's the first law of its kind that addressed the various aspects of trafficking, and it aims to combat measures to prevent trafficking, protect its victims, and prosecute those accountable for trafficking. We call those the 3 Ps. I haven't been able to read over the reauthorization yet. I know Hillary Clinton wanted to include a 4th P, and that was partnership, because we can't, as Love 146 or as Shared Hope International or GEMS or Fair Girls, whatever organizations are out there working to combat this issue, we all can't do it alone. We need to work collaboratively together with service providers, with law enforcement, to make this, to restore this child. Who are the victims? Obviously, we're talking here about mostly girls, and some of you might be wondering, like, hey, is this something that's happening to boys? Yes, this is something that's happening to boys. I don't think we're doing a very good job of research around boys. I am starting to collaborate with an agency in Massachusetts that's doing more work with boys. They started in October and are already at capacity and working with boys. And so they are seeing very similar trends with girls, whether it's being pimped out by a pimp, or being out on the streets for survival sex or running away. There's very many similarities between the two genders. I see someone asking a question here. What does CSEC stand for? And that's Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children. This was a quote from a survivor here in Connecticut from a very large case that we had. Corey Davis, he was your textbook pimp, very brutal. But this survivor said, he would decide what I ate, how my hair would look, and what I wore. I felt like a slave. I wanted to be loved. That's what I was searching for. I wanted someone who would always be there for me because I never, ever had this. So in looking at risk factors that can increase vulnerability, specifically on the individual level, this photo, this drawing that you're seeing is another drawing from the Tell Your Friends program of a young girl who disclosed her abuse and trafficking situation through her artwork. Because we know not all kids can disclose such horrendous things that are happening to them verbally, and have an it's easier for them to disclose through artwork or even poetry. So sexual abuse is found in 70 to 90% of cases. I think here in Connecticut we have over 110 victims identified in the past 4 years, and I want to say something like 90% of those cases have had a history of sexual abuse. That's certainly not to say that anyone who's been sexually abused is destined for this sort of life or exploitation, because we've worked with many people who've been sexually abused and lead very productive lives, but it is a very, puts them at very high risk because the pimp figures out that vulnerability and can take advantage of that. And if we also think about what is learned growing up in a sexually abusive home, that this is something that's normal. My uncle told me this is what adults and kids do. This is how I'm shown love. This is all I'm worth. This is what my body's for. There's a lot of things that are learned, and pimps, I call pimps M&Ms, and I'm sorry if that just ruins the candy for you, but M&Ms, they're master manipulators. And so it is their job to take any vulnerability, and they can take anything that may even be, you may think is a strength, and take advantage of that and turn it into a vulnerability. So runaways, throwaways, so being running away for, maybe they're lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, they're not being accepted by their family, and they're thrown out of their homes, running away because of domestic violence in the home or abuse that's happening in the home, drugs. We have substance abuse by the parents or themselves, low self-esteem, low self-worth, fractured families. So having an absent father, this is huge, because pimps will then turn around and say, I'll be the daddy for you that you've never had. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to love you. And I'm going to give you everything that you need. I'll protect you. And when you don't have that and someone comes along with that, especially a child who's been longing for that love and attention, it's hard to deny that. It's a human need to want to be loved and to have that affection and attention from someone. Involvement with the child welfare system. Of course, we're seeing gender, race, and class inequality within this issue. Glorification of pimp culture in the media, huge. I mean, if any of you think that the media and society and music and television and movies have no influence, I encourage you to listen to 50 Cent's PIMP song and let me know if you change your mind. The desire for a better life. So now here you would think that's a strength, that the child wants a better life. There's been countless interviews with pimps done where they say, girls are hungry for a better life or hungry for a glamorous lifestyle. You give it to them, they'll come. So, I mean, if you think about teenage girls or even teenage boys who imagine being, their favorite actress or their favorite singer, and wishing that they had their life, and they could go to dinners in limos, and they could go to the Oscars, and they could go to the Grammys and have all this special treatment in the fancy places. The pimps will give that to them, and that makes them feel good. So 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused by the age of 18, and 75% of children victimized through involvement, and this is something that we kind of already went over already in the last slide, victimized through commercial sexual exploitation, more notably prostitution, have been sexually abused. So where do they recruit? Everywhere. Where kids go, these pimps go. So we have the malls, movie theaters, all-age nightclubs, and this is not to scare you guys, because I'm sure many of you might have children, and I get it in so many trainings like, I'm locking my kid in their room and they're never coming out. No, don't do that. Please don't lock your kids in their room. But having conversations with them about this kind of stuff is so important. You know, gone are the days, I think, of stranger danger and all of that stuff, but you know, just having conversations about these real issues will make them more aware of what to look out for when they're out there. And so malls, movie theaters, all-age nightclubs, I've heard of cases where a pimp has had a recruiter go into a mall and try and recruit girls being a modeling agent. And so he'll say, they had said that he would watch girls window shop, and he would approach them and say, you are so beautiful, here's my card, I work for this modeling agency, I think you should try out, I can help you get money to buy those things you want. And not only that, again, the vulnerability factors. If I asked many of you to go into a mall and you saw a group of kids standing around, how long would it take you to figure out the most vulnerable in the group? You know, the one with the head down, the one not talking very much. You know, we'd figure it out pretty easily. But again, these pimps are master manipulators. This is their job to find these vulnerable kids and exploit them. And they'll figure it out within a couple seconds. And so how do they recruit them and turn them out? So I talked a little bit about the fraud part, the modeling, acting. Actually, we had a group home here in Connecticut that was doing a fundraiser for Haiti victims when the earthquake hit. And so this was several years ago. But was doing this fundraiser, doing a bake sale outside of one of our grocery stores here called Stop and Shop. And to get more attention, some of the girls started singing to get people to go buy the baked goods. And this one girl was approached by a man who said, oh my gosh, you're amazing, you're such a good singer, here's my card, give me a call, I'm an agent, I'm a producer, I can get you linked up with the right people. Thankfully, the staff at this group home had gone through the training, had gone through a similar training like this, except for it was an all-day training that we provided to them, and the girls had gone through the My Life, My Choice groups. And the staff actually allowed the pimp into the home. They invited him there. And this was very smart, even though a lot of people may think it wasn't smart. But this was very smart of the staff there. They sat down with the girl and the pimp. And the pimp actually brought his bottom, which is, in this upside-down world, considered the top girl. And talked about the opportunities. He had this whole binder. He had a website. I mean, he was prepared. Gathered all the information. When he left, the staff called the FBI, gave them all the information. The FBI ended up launching this investigation and opened up a huge human trafficking ring, and they were able to arrest all of them, and then some. So it was very smart of the staff to do that. Force is obviously violence. Could be raping them, gang raping them, kidnapping them. Coercion are threats. So if you don't do this for me, I'm going to kill you, or I'm going to kill your mom. I'll drop you off somewhere. I know where your sister is. I'll pick her up and I'll exploit her. Befriending and peer recruitment. I've been in group homes where young girls are recruiting other girls inside group homes, or even in schools. If you guys are interested, I'll tell you the background story to it, but it's a very good training video on a website called Truckers Against Trafficking. It's about 20 minutes long if you'd like to watch it. And kind of the backstory to this story that you'll see, this young girl and her cousin were walking to Wendy's for a Frosty and were picked up by a pimp and exploited at truck stops. But more importantly, this pimp already knew everything about them before he picked them up. And the reason he knew so much about them is because he had a kid inside the schools that he was paying and telling him, give me the names and all the information that you can about anyone in your school who wouldn't be missed if they were gone. And it happened to be these two girls. And so when he pulled up, he knew their names, he knew everything about them, things they liked, any extracurricular activities they were in, where they lived, everything. And peer recruitment, like I said, can be other kids recruiting other kids, whether they're male or female. Seduction, this is the most common tactic used in the United States. Lover boy, Prince Charming, the most amazing boy I've ever met, and this is not to say that men, any man that treats a girl properly is a pimp, but, this is, it's almost too good to be true. It's excessive, and over a period of time, they start to be controlling and start to isolate. Like, no, I don't want you to hang out with your friends. I want to hang out with you. I want to spend time with you. I love you. And especially for a girl who may have had a history of trauma or abuse and neglect, it feels good to know that they want to be with them and no one else. We talked about parents selling children, and then we also talked about the internet. This is also from a Connecticut survivor here that was in the Corey Davis case that I mentioned before. She said, when I went to clubs, I had to tell people I fell off stage because I had so many bruises in my ribs, face, and legs. He would watch me or have me watched by someone else to make sure that I was working and not trying to run away. And so one thing to realize is that if these girls, especially a white girl, blonde hair, blue eyes, is going to bring them a ton more money, and so if they bring them a lot of money, you better guarantee they are going to be watched like hawks. So some red flags that I want you guys to think about here, and all of this may not be applicable to your agency or the services that you're providing, so take what you know will apply to you. But realizing that secrecy and whereabouts, unaccounted time for time, contradicting personal information, which is what I talked about before, and realize that it's not just one thing here that's going to be like, oh, that person's a human trafficking victim. They have to have several of these factors for it to be considered. And some of you may be saying to yourselves as we're reading through these, holy cow, I know so-and-so, and when I was working with them 2 years ago, now I know what happened. Now I know what's going on. I don't think I've had one training yet where someone hasn't said that to me. And even people get emotional and upset that they didn't know this sooner and that they couldn't have done anything sooner, but realizing now you know this information and carry it forward, and there's nothing stopping you from helping them now. Chronic running away, a history of multiple sexually transmitted diseases, visible signs of abuse, so unexplained bruises, black eyes, cuts, or marks all of a sudden showing up on their body, appearing exhausted. Many of these kids, on an average, are required to perform 10, 15, 20 sexual acts a night. They could be out there from nighttime to morning time, and you can imagine what kind of, not even just lack of sleep, but the trauma, how exhausting that is on an individual's body. And someone doesn't have to be gone. I just want to put this out there. A child doesn't have to be missing for days on end for them to be considered trafficked. We've had kids missing for the weekend. We've had kids being picked up at school during lunch hour and brought back in time for the bus. I've had a girl that I was working with that was given a half-hour pass a couple times a day to get out and get fresh air. She did it once on a half-hour pass. So it doesn't have to be days at a time that these kids are gone. Uses language from the life, so refers to her pimp or her quote-unquote boyfriend as my daddy. Wives-in-law are the other girls that are working with him in the stable. So if you think of stable of horses, stable of girls. Pimps up, pose down. This is talking specifically about, so when you're out there working, pimps are on the sidewalks and the hoes are in the streets because that's where they're supposed to be to make the money. So when a pimp is around, you know when their pimp is around because they're on the streets, not on the sidewalks. And sometimes it can also refer to not looking another pimp in the eye, or even your own pimp in the eyes. Has lost interest in age-appropriate activities, frequent absences, sudden wearing of clothes and jewelry that are clearly more expensive than previously worn or not weather appropriate. So you know this young girl has only been able to afford, or your Youth and Family Services or Department of Children and Families has only been able to provide them with clothes from Walmart or Target, and all of a sudden they start showing up with Gucci or, you know, I'm a social worker and I don't make tons of money, so I think Abercrombie & Fitch is expensive. So, you know, maybe showing up with Abercrombie & Fitch, and that's not something you typically know that they wear. Getting hair and nails done. You know, we know how expensive, especially ladies, how getting hair and nails done. We actually had some girls in a group home who were frequently coming back with their hair and nails done, and I mean, it could be sometimes $150, you know, to get your hair done and your nails done, and knowing that these girls are only getting a $25 allowance every week. Okay, where's that extra money coming from? Sudden presence of an older boyfriend or friend, fearful, anxious, submissive behavior, tension, or nervousness, has an interest in older men. Several young girls that I'm working with have an interest in older men. And, you know, we have to think about how they've had to grow up pretty fast. Older men are more mature, and they're interested in that. But then there's also the concern of, hey, what's this older man wanting to do with this young child? Evidence of a controlling relationship, not in control of their own money. Tattoo that he or she is reluctant to explain. The key word there is reluctant. Reluctant to explain. The key word there is reluctant. We know teenagers, and when they're rebellious, they're going to want to tell everyone about this tattoo, maybe keep it quiet for mom and dad, but they're going to want to talk about it, brag about it. But if someone sees it and you ask about it and they're very reluctant to explain it, there needs to be some further questioning. You know, some other ones that I don't have on here is obviously having wads of cash on them. We've had girls with wads of cash stuffed into their bras, having several hotel key cards. So those are all things to look out for as well. And what can you do? What is your responsibility? Two major ways that you can help. If any of you are like me, when I first started in this work, I wanted to be like Liam Neeson in Taken and go out to these brothels and go out to these hotels and motels and bust down the doors and gather these girls up and race out of there and, you know, shoot up all the bad guys, but that's really not the most useful and effective way to protect these kids. So realizing over time that truly acknowledging that this is existing, so not turning the other way, acknowledging that CSEC exists and creating awareness around this issue. So important. Take this information, talk to your colleagues about it, let them know this is something going on, share this PowerPoint with people, and if you suspect it, report it. I know this looks a little off the way it's typed out for the national hotline number, but that's a pretty easy way to remember it. But 888-3737-888. If you think there's something going on, call that number, report it, and they'll give you links to the closest service providers in your area. Here's my contact information. Should you have any questions after this training, please feel free to reach out. You can email me or call me with your questions, and I will do whatever I can to help you out. And I think with that, I'm going to pass it over.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicole. That was a great and informative presentation. And thanks to Love 146 and their commitment to this issue and willingness to partner with COA on such an important initiative. My name is Emily Gibson. I'm a Standards Associate at COA. Thank you so much for joining this webinar and for your interest in learning more about how you can help in preventing, identifying, and responding to human trafficking. So for those of you on this webinar who are not from a COA-accredited organization, COA is an independent, non-for-profit accreditor of child welfare, behavioral health care, and a number of other community-based services. We accredit 47 different services that cover more than 125 types of programs. And we currently accredit about 2,000 public and private organizations. Our mission here at COA is to partner with human service organizations worldwide to improve service delivery outcomes by developing, applying, and promoting accreditation standards. So with that mission in mind, COA recognized the significance of the issue of human trafficking and the impact our accredited organizations could make if they were fully aware of how they could help. So we decided to strengthen our standards to address human trafficking, focusing our work on practices associated with prevention, identification, training, and response. These standards were developed through coordination with organizations working at the forefront of the issue of human trafficking, including Love 146, the Connecticut Department of Children and Families, GEMS here in New York City, the Florida Coalition Against Human Trafficking, and a number of other organizations that are deeply committed to making a difference for individuals who are impacted by this issue. These organizations participated in panel discussions to identify the services most commonly impacted and help to identify the practices we needed to highlight within our standards. We also conducted an extensive literature review, which resulted in a comprehensive reference list, and that can be accessed on our human trafficking prevention webpage on our website. You can find a link to that page from our homepage, coanet.org. So at this point, COA has incorporated this information into 3 service sections: our residential treatment services, our foster care services, and our volunteer mentoring services. We've also included a new standard in the administrative and service environment section. That standard is ASC 606, which addresses runaway protocols. We chose the residential treatment section for this project because youth in residential treatment homes are vulnerable to becoming trafficked, and also because traffickers are known to target children outside of treatment homes. So the information in this section concentrates on prevention and identification, and also the treatment of trafficking victims. We chose the foster care section because youth in foster care are also vulnerable to trafficking when they run away. So this section focuses on the identification of victims and also on creating a safe and accepting home environment for those that run away. The volunteer mentoring section was a little different and a little bit more forward-thinking. Our panel was really excited to incorporate information into this section because volunteer mentoring is increasingly being utilized to provide a stable source of support to those who have been identified as victims of human trafficking, especially as part of their recovery and reintegration outside of the life. We are also in the process of researching and developing language to be incorporated into our shelter services standards. So you will see that information posted on our standards updates page once it has been finalized. Throughout all the sections that I mentioned, the information that we incorporated follows along these common themes. That is the training of staff, educating parents and foster parents, knowing the warning signs, providing and linking victims to needed services, and developing protocols to properly respond when children run away and also when they return to care. So reflecting back on our mission and vision, as noted earlier, COA really hopes to utilize our role as an accreditor to heighten awareness of this critical issue through education and information sharing, as well as through the promotion of best practices. So we really hope that you will embrace this opportunity to make an impact and partner with us on this important endeavor. And here's my contact information. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thanks again to Nicole for presenting her information.